International trade, or trade between nations, can be mutually beneficial, just like trade between individuals. In fact, that's all international trade is. It's trade between individuals. It is someone in America buying products made by someone in Mexico, or vice versa. Many people in Adam Smith's day, and still today, were skeptical of this sort of trade. Why benefit a foreigner by buying their product instead of buying from someone close to home and helping the people around you, they thought. They saw trade as a zero-sum game, and this attitude persists to this day, despite Adam Smith's best efforts. To understand why international trade can be so beneficial, we can use supply and demand. Let's say that this is the market for sugar in the United States. We're able to grow a lot of sugar on our own in states like Florida. That would be our domestic supply. Where our domestic supply crosses with our domestic demand, representing the U.S. consumers of sugar, will be the equilibrium. Competition between different sugar producers will drive us to this equilibrium and set the market price we would see if we didn't allow any trade with other nations. But if we open up the U.S. to trade and allow foreign producers to sell to U.S. consumers, that will increase the supply of sugar in the U.S., as it adds the world supply to our domestic supply. This added supply will drive the market price of sugar down as foreign producers compete with our domestic ones. The lower market price with trade will be a benefit to consumers who will choose to buy more sugar at the lower price. But our domestic producers will find it difficult to compete. At this low price, the amount of sugar we produce domestically will fall to this point. The domestic supply curve tells us how much sugar domestic producers will make at this price, and it is at this lower quantity. So our consumers are buying this higher quantity of sugar, and our producers are only making this lower quantity. The difference has to come from the foreign producers. So this gap will be the quantity that we import. I really think this is one of the most informative applications of supply and demand. People go totally funny in the head when it comes to foreigners, and we tend to only want to count the benefits and ignore the costs, or only count the costs and ignore the benefits. But supply and demand makes the impacts of trade clear. When we import goods and services, it means consumers are able to buy more of it at the lower price. And that's a clear win for consumer welfare. But our domestic producers end up selling less at a lower price, a clear loss for them. But we can't stop there. We should also think about what happens when we open up to trade and export goods and services to other countries. Let's say that this is the market for corn. We have a large domestic supply of corn, which comes from all the corn growers across the United States. And we also have a voracious demand for corn. Competition in the market will set the price at this equilibrium. But if we open up to trade with other nations, they will probably want to buy some of our corn. The foreign consumers will add to our domestic demand, shift it to the right, with this new demand curve representing both our demand and the demand from the rest of the world. Higher demand will bid up the price of corn in order to incentivize more corn production, pushing us to this new equilibrium at a higher price and a higher quantity. With this higher market price, some domestic consumers may choose to take a pass on corn. The domestic quantity demanded will be lower than it was without trade due to the high price. So our producers are making this high quantity of corn, but our consumers only buy this low quantity. The remainder are exports, the corn we sell to foreigners. Here too, supply and demand gives us a clear picture of the effects of opening up to trade. Producers sell more corn at a higher price, practically the definition of good for business. but consumers are getting less corn and paying more for it, working out to a loss for them. Let's summarize the effects of opening up to trade. For imported goods, domestic consumers gain. They get more stuff at a lower price, improving consumer welfare and raising their standard of living. Domestic producers lose, however. The foreign competition drives many of them out of business, and the industry as a whole is selling less stuff at a lower price. For exported goods, domestic consumers lose. They have to pay a higher price, which has been driven up by foreign demand, and so they will be able to consume less. But domestic producers gain, selling more at a higher price. You may be thinking that these all just cancel each other out. Consumers gain from imports, producers gain from exports, and those gains cover their losses. But then you would be thinking like a mercantilist, and you would be wrong. The supply and demand analysis is showing us something that is difficult to see with just this summary. Let's take another look at this. Here's our market for sugar again, starting with no trade. The market sets the price, and anyone willing to pay that price is able to buy some sugar, because producers are willing to produce the quantity that people want at that price. But everyone who buys sugar is paying less than what they're willing to pay for it. Remember, demand represents what people are willing to pay. The market price is what they actually have to pay. And so this area above the market price, but below the demand curve, represents what we call consumer's surplus. If you walk into the store ready to spend $5 for a pound of sugar, but you only have to spend $2, you just got $3 worth of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is essentially all the money we don't have to spend in this market that we would be willing to spend if we had to. When we say that trade is mutually beneficial, this is the benefit we are talking about. A similar application works for producers. Supply represents the marginal cost of production, or how much it costs to produce that unit. Suppliers will produce any units that cost less than the price they earn when they sell it. The difference is the profit they make on that unit. So this area, below the price earned, but above the cost paid to produce it, is what we call producer's surplus. Producer's surplus isn't exactly the same as profit because firms might have startup costs that have to come out of this, but it certainly defines what the maximum profit could be in the market. When the nation opens up for trade and the world is able to supply this good at a lower price, it increases the supply and drives us to this new equilibrium. At the lower price, consumers buy more, and their consumer surplus extends down to that low price. Our domestic producers lose this area of surplus. They lose that money because they produce less at the lower price. But every penny of what producers lose is now accrued to consumer surplus. In essence, the producer's loss is the consumer's gain. But then there's this region here, an added amount of consumer surplus that is being enjoyed by the people who can now afford this product and are willing to pay for it at the lowered price. There are new transactions, new benefits to consumers who weren't getting anything before. This added consumer surplus is the key to the whole thing, and supply and demand analysis shows that the benefit to consumers will always outweigh the loss to producers. Let's look at the case of exports. Here again is our consumer and producer surplus without trade. Notice that at the market equilibrium, this is the biggest our combined surplus can be. No other price yields a higher surplus than this, which is why Adam Smith thought that this was the best allocation of our resources. But when we open up to trade, a new distribution becomes possible. World demand adds to our own and pushes the price up to this new equilibrium. At the higher price, producers take a bigger chunk of surplus, and consumers lose some of their surplus. But notice here too, every penny consumers lose from their surplus is a penny gained by producers. But producers gain even more than that. They gain this area in surplus too, which no one was getting before. These are added profits for the producers, which means added income for our country, just as it was with imports. When trade is voluntary and unrestricted, the gains are bigger than the losses. It is important to not lose the details in the conclusion. Opening up to trade redistributes the benefits produced by our economy. Imports shift benefits from domestic producers to domestic consumers. Exports shift benefits from domestic consumers to domestic producers. But in both situations, there is a little extra something added to the benefits due to the increased number of transactions that otherwise don't occur without international trade. For that reason, the net benefits are always positive. They are positive for imports and exports independently. We don't need one to cancel out the other. Both are net positive all on their own.